A German SS officer, Dr. Joseph Mengele, sent tens of thousands to the gas chambers.
Mengele came in every morning and every evening, twice a day, with 4 other doctors. And he declared, very sarcastically laughing,
"The mysterious deaths of patients within the confines of a hospital have long been a source of fascination and intrigue. While the vast majority of healthcare professionals are dedicated to saving lives, a small, sinister minority can sometimes turn toward the dark side, becoming perpetrators of heinous crimes. In these chilling scenarios, medical practitioners who have taken an oath to do no harm find themselves entangled in a web of deceit and malevolence. The motivations behind these acts can range from personal vendettas and financial gain to a twisted sense of power and control. Join me as we explore the stories of the 15 most evil doctors in history." Number 15. Marcel Petiot. During World War II, Marcel Petiot, a French doctor, is revealed as one of history's most evil individuals. His story begins with a gruesome discovery in his Paris home, where the police found the remains of multiple individuals in a basement chamber. Petiot had masqueraded as a French resistance fighter and mayor while secretly engaging in a horrific killing spree. Petiot's troubled history included childhood signs of instability, expulsion from schools, and arrests for criminal behavior. Despite this, he completed his medical training and served in World War I, albeit with mental health issues and erratic conduct. After being discharged from the military, he began his medical career, which was marked by kleptomania and questionable practices. He moved to a small village and was elected mayor, but faced scandals for theft and embezzlement. Later, he operated a shady medical practice in Paris, prescribing addictive drugs and forging death certificates. Despite numerous run-ins with the law, he continued his criminal activities. As World War II erupted, Petiot joined the French resistance, but instead of aiding those in need, he lured victims into his home, promising safe passage to Argentina. He injected them with poison, killing many Jews, resistance members, and others. The Gestapo arrested him but released him, unaware of his true crimes. Petiot's elaborate deceptions allowed him to rise within the resistance's ranks, all while continuing his murder spree. Eventually, he was exposed when a newspaper accused him of collaborating with the Nazis. The police discovered his horrific deeds and arrested him. In May 1946, Marcel Petiot faced the guillotine, admitting to killing 19 of his 27 known victims. He left a horrifying legacy as one of history's most sinister serial killers who preyed on the vulnerable during great turmoil. Number 14. Andrew Wakefield. Andrew Wakefield is a former British doctor who became notorious for his controversial and widely discredited research paper on the alleged link between the MMR vaccine and autism. His work, published in 1998 in the prestigious medical journal The Lancet, caused a major public health scare and led to declining vaccination rates in many countries. In his paper, Wakefield claimed to have found a connection between the MMR vaccine, gastrointestinal problems, and autism in a small group of children he studied. This assertion sparked widespread panic among parents who feared that vaccinating their children would put them at risk of developing autism. However, Wakefield's research methods and conclusions were soon subjected to intense scrutiny and criticism by the scientific community. His study revealed serious methodological flaws, including small and non-representative sample sizes, biased selection of participants, and conflicts of interest. Additionally, his claims lacked empirical evidence and failed to establish a causal link between the MMR vaccine and autism. The Lancet eventually retracted the paper in 2010, and Wakefield's medical license was revoked in the United Kingdom due to ethical violations, dishonesty, and misconduct related to his research. The General Medical Council found him guilty of multiple charges, including conducting invasive medical procedures on children without ethical approval. Number 13. John Bodkin Adams. Born on January 21, 1899, in Randalstown, County Antrim, Ireland, Adams settled in the seaside town of Eastbourne, Sussex, where he became a popular general practitioner known for his charm and pleasant personality. Adams had a substantial private practice and built a reputation for his willingness to visit patients at their homes, particularly elderly patients with various ailments. However, the high number of deaths among Adams's patients eventually raised suspicions. Many of his patients passed away between 1946 and 1956, leaving him considerable bequests in their wills. In many cases, Adams was the last person to see these patients alive. The most significant red flag was the large sums of money and valuable possessions Adams inherited from his deceased patients. Many of these patients had previously been in good health, and their sudden deaths were often attributed to natural causes. This pattern of inheriting wealth from deceased patients attracted the attention of local authorities and some colleagues. In 1956, the police investigated Adams's activities, uncovering disturbing evidence. It was revealed that he had administered lethal doses of various drugs, including morphine and other opiates, to many of his patients. He was charged with the murder of two of his patients, Edith Alice Morell and Gertrude Hullett, who had left him substantial bequests. During his trial in 1957, Adams was represented by noted attorney Frederick Lawton, and the case garnered significant media attention. The prosecution presented evidence of Adams's suspicious prescribing patterns and the many deaths linked to his medical care. However, the case against him relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, as there was no direct proof of murder. In a surprising turn of events, the jury found Adams not guilty of both murder charges, and he walked free. This verdict has remained a source of controversy and speculation ever since. Some believe that Adams was genuinely innocent and had merely provided palliative care to terminally ill patients. Others argue that the lack of concrete evidence and the high burden of proof in criminal cases contributed to the not guilty verdict. After his acquittal, John Bodkin Adams returned to his medical practice in Eastbourne, where he continued to see patients until his retirement in 1983. He lived until age 84, passing away on July 4, 1984. Number 12. Herman Webster. Mudgett, Herman Webster Mudgett, also known as H. Holmes, began working at a drugstore owned by a fellow pharmacist, Elizabeth S. Holton, who mysteriously disappeared. Holmes eventually transformed the store into a macabre labyrinth of hidden rooms, secret passages, and torture chambers. One of the most notorious aspects of Holmes's killing spree was the construction of his infamous Murder Castle. Located at 63rd and Wallace Streets in Chicago, this three-story building contained soundproof rooms, trapdoors, chutes, and a crematorium. It was designed to facilitate his sadistic desires while avoiding detection. Holmes would lure unsuspecting victims, mainly young women, into the hotel and subject them to horrific experiments and torture before killing them. Holmes is believed to have committed his first murder in 1891 when he killed a former medical school colleague, Dr. Robert Leacock, and collected insurance money in his name. However, his killing spree escalated in 1893 during the Chicago World's Fair, also known as the World's Columbian Exposition. The fair drew crowds of visitors to the city, providing Holmes with a large pool of potential victims. Holmes would often hire employees and mistresses only to torture and kill them later. He would also engage in insurance fraud by taking out life insurance policies on these individuals and then staging their deaths as accidents. Some victims were locked in airtight vaults or left to die in soundproof rooms, where they would slowly suffocate. Others were subjected to experiments and dissections while still alive. One of Holmes's most well-documented victims was Benjamin Pitezel, a former accomplice. Holmes persuaded Pitezel to fake his death for a $10,000 life insurance policy, but instead, he murdered him. Pitezel's daughters, Alice and Nellie, also fell victim to Holmes's cruelty. He killed them gruesomely, including gassing, strangulation, and burning their bodies. Holmes's reign of terror finally ended in 1895 when he was arrested in Boston on suspicion of insurance fraud. However, during the Pitezel case investigation, detectives uncovered the extent of his crimes. Holmes was linked to multiple murders and led authorities to the Murder Castle in Chicago, where they discovered evidence of his sadistic acts. In 1896, H. Holmes stood trial for the murder of Benjamin Pitezel and was found guilty. He was sentenced to death and executed by hanging on May 7, 1896 in Philadelphia. Number 11. Linda Bury Field Hazard. She started her fasting sanitarium in Olalla, a small town near Seattle. Her facility attracted patients seeking alternative treatments for various ailments. However, Hazard's true intentions were far from benevolent. One of the most shocking aspects of Hazard's crimes was her method of murder. She would convince her patients to engage in prolonged and extreme fasts, depriving them of food for extended periods, often well beyond what was safe. As her victims weakened, she would manipulate them into signing over their assets and properties, ensuring that she would inherit their wealth upon their deaths. Her first known victim was Claire Williamson, a wealthy Canadian woman who sought treatment for a stomach ailment in 1911. Hazard subjected Williamson to a grueling 50-day fast, during which she wasted away to a mere 50 pounds before dying of starvation. Hazard then fraudulently claimed Williamson's properties and assets. Hazard's sinister practices continued as she exploited vulnerable patients, many of whom came to her desperate for a cure. She would withhold food from her victims, often under the guise of monitoring their fasts, while in reality, she was hastening their demise. In 1912, another victim, Mary Dorothea Williamson, Claire Williamson's sister, became suspicious of her sister's death and began investigating Hazard. She discovered that her sister's will had been fraudulently altered in Hazard's favor. Mary then reported her concerns to the authorities, leading to Hazard's arrest and the exhumation of Claire Williamson's body, which revealed signs of severe malnutrition. Hazard defended herself during her trial in 1912, arguing that her fasting treatments were legitimate and scientifically sound. However, the evidence against her was overwhelming, and she was convicted of manslaughter in connection with Claire Williamson's death. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison. After her release, Hazard returned to her fasting sanitarium, continuing her deadly practices. In 1935, she was suspected of being involved in the deaths of 2 more patients, Claire and Dorothea Williamson's brother, Samuel Williamson, and a man named Lebbeus Mitchell. However, she was never charged in connection with these deaths. Number 10. Michael Swango. Swango's early life showed no obvious signs of the dark path he would later take. He excelled academically and earned a degree in biology from Quincy College in Illinois. His interest in medicine led him to pursue a healthcare career, and he enrolled in the Southern Illinois University School of Medicine in 1983. However, there were signs of disturbing behavior even during his time in medical school. Swango was known to have an unusual fascination with death, often attending autopsies out of curiosity. He also had a habit of falsely reporting his medical conditions, leading his professors and colleagues to question his honesty. Swango's medical career began in earnest when he obtained his medical degree in 1986. He completed his internship and residency at various hospitals in Ohio and New York, where he continued to exhibit troubling behavior. Co-workers observed that patients seemed to take a turn for the worse when Swango was on duty, with an unusual number of deaths occurring under his care. In 1993, Swango's suspicious actions finally drew the attention of authorities. While working at a hospital in Ohio, he was found to own various poisons and chemicals, including arsenic. He was arrested and charged with theft, but the charges were unrelated to patient deaths. While awaiting trial, Swango's secret life began to unravel. Investigators discovered that he had a pattern of falsifying records and administering lethal doses of medications to patients under his care. Some colleagues even noted that he seemed to derive a perverse pleasure from witnessing the suffering and deaths of his patients. Swango pleaded guilty to killing 3 patients in 2000 and was sentenced to life without parole. However, the true extent of his crimes may never be known, as he is suspected of being responsible for the deaths of as many as 60 patients and colleagues during his medical career. Number 9. Harold Shipman. The first known victim of Shipman was Eva Lyons, who died under his care in 1975. Shipman certified her death due to natural causes, and her passing went unquestioned. However, it was only the beginning of his murderous spree. Over the years, Shipman's patients began to die at an alarming rate under suspicious circumstances. His preferred method of murder was administering lethal doses of the drug diamorphine, a powerful opioid painkiller, to his victims. He would then falsely certify their deaths as caused by natural illnesses like heart attacks or strokes. One of the most disturbing aspects of Shipman's crimes was his deliberate manipulation of records and documents. He often altered medical records to support his false claims of natural deaths and created a facade of legitimate medical practice. His deception went undetected for years as he continued to kill his patients with impunity. It wasn't until 1998 that Shipman's crimes began to unravel. Fellow doctors and colleagues became suspicious of the high number of deaths under his care, prompting an investigation by the authorities. The inquiry uncovered a shocking pattern of deaths centered around Shipman, and his arrest followed shortly after that. In 2000, Harold Shipman was put on trial, facing 15 charges of murder and 1 charge of forgery. During the trial, the evidence against him was overwhelming. His medical colleagues testified against him, and the number of victims was staggering. In January 2000, he was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment. Shipman's reign of terror resulted in the deaths of at least 218 patients, although the actual number may have been much higher. His motives remain the subject of speculation, with some suggesting that he derived a perverse sense of power and control from taking the lives of others. His case had a profound impact on the healthcare system in the United Kingdom. It led to significant changes in the regulation of doctors and the monitoring of patient deaths. The Shipman Inquiry, chaired by Dame Janet Smith, investigated the circumstances surrounding his crimes and made numerous recommendations to prevent similar incidents. On January 13, 2004, Harold Shipman was found dead in his prison cell, having committed suicide by hanging. Number 8. Joseph Mengele. In 1937, Mengele joined the Nazi Party and the Schutzstaffel. When World War II broke out in 1939, he was drafted into the Waffen-SS and served on the Eastern Front. However, in 1943, Mengele was transferred to Auschwitz, the largest and most notorious of the Nazi concentration camps. At Auschwitz, Mengele was the Birkenau subcamp's chief medical officer, where he performed gruesome experiments on prisoners, primarily Jews. His experiments ranged from testing the effects of various drugs and chemicals on human subjects to studying twins and other individuals with genetic conditions. These experiments were often lethal, and many prisoners suffered excruciating pain and death. One of Mengele's most notorious areas of research involved twins. He conducted horrific experiments on identical and fraternal twins, including injecting them with deadly diseases, intentionally causing infections, and performing surgeries without anesthesia. He aimed to explore the hereditary factors behind twins and further the Nazis' eugenics agenda. Mengele's sadistic experiments extended to both children and adults. He would often randomly select prisoners to serve as subjects in his experiments, subjecting them to unbearable pain, mutilation, and, ultimately, death. His actions earned him the nickname Angel of Death among the inmates, as he was responsible for countless deaths and immense suffering. Despite the horrific nature of his experiments, Mengele was never brought to justice for his crimes during his lifetime. As Allied forces advanced through Europe and the Holocaust ended, Mengele fled Auschwitz in January 1945 and hid. For years, he evaded capture, living under various false identities in South America. He first settled in Argentina, then Paraguay, and later Brazil. During his time in South America, Mengele lived a relatively normal life, working as a farmhand and later as a salesman. It was not until the late 1970s that international interest in capturing war criminals increased, and Mengele's whereabouts became widely known. In 1985, he drowned in Brazil while swimming and subsequently died. His remains were exhumed and identified through forensic testing, finally confirming his death. Number 7. Jayant Patel. Patel began working at Bundaberg Base Hospital in Queensland, Australia in 2003. Almost immediately, concerns arose about his surgical skills and conduct. Nurses and colleagues reported alarming incidents of surgical errors, including botched surgeries and post-operative complications. Hospital administrators largely ignored these concerns, and Patel continued to operate on patients. One of the most high-profile cases involving Patel was that of Jerry Kemps, a patient who died following a surgery performed by Patel. Kemps's death sparked public outrage and prompted investigations into Patel's practices. Subsequent inquiries revealed a pattern of negligence, incompetence, and unethical behavior that had led to patient deaths and harm. The most notorious case associated with Patel was that of James Phillips, a patient who underwent surgery for a hernia at Bundaberg Hospital in 2003. Patel performed the procedure, and Phillips experienced severe post-operative complications. Patel's failure to properly address these complications resulted in Phillips's death. This case, among others, led to Patel being dubbed Dr. Death by the media. Patel was subsequently charged with several counts of manslaughter and grievous bodily harm concerning his surgical practices at Bundaberg Hospital. He faced a high-profile trial that garnered significant media attention and public interest. In 2010, he was found guilty of 3 counts of manslaughter and 1 count of grievous bodily harm. His conviction and the subsequent sentencing to 7 years in prison highlighted the gravity of his actions and the impact on patients and their families. Patel's medical career had caused immense suffering, and his negligence had led to unnecessary deaths and harm. Patel's conviction was partially overturned in 2012, and he was released from prison. He was deported to the United States, where he faced additional legal challenges related to his medical license and past actions. Number 6. Richard Angelo. Angelo pursued a career in healthcare, attending nursing school at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. He graduated in 1907 and soon found employment as a licensed practical nurse at Good Samaritan Hospital in Suffern, New York. On the surface, Angelo appeared to be a dedicated and compassionate nurse, but his actions concealed a dark and sinister secret. Not long before, suspicious events began to unfold at Good Samaritan Hospital. Patients admitted to the hospital's intensive care unit began experiencing severe medical crises and unexplained cardiac arrests at an alarming rate. Hospital staff and physicians were puzzled by the sudden increase in life-threatening events, and investigations were launched to determine the cause. What investigators uncovered was deeply disturbing. It appeared that someone within the hospital was intentionally tampering with patients' 4 bags, injecting them with lethal doses of a paralytic agent called Pavulon. Pavulon is used in hospitals to induce paralysis in patients who require mechanical ventilation. When administered in excessive amounts, it leads to respiratory failure and death. The 4 bags contained traces of Pavulon, and the hospital staff realized that these incidents were not the result of natural medical conditions. Suspicion began to fall on Richard Angelo, the common factor in many cases. Angelo's motive for these heinous acts was complex. He craved attention and sought to portray himself as a hero by responding to the emergencies he created. He would administer the Pavulon and then rush to the patient's side to perform life-saving interventions, gaining the admiration and trust of his colleagues. In his warped mind, he believed that his actions were a way to demonstrate his competence as a nurse. As investigators delved deeper into Angelo's actions, they discovered that he was obsessed with the TV show Rescue 911, featuring dramatic reenactments of real-life emergency situations. Angelo had even documented some of his actions on video, further highlighting his desire for recognition. In March 1987, Richard Angelo was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder and tampering with medical equipment. He was accused of causing the deaths of 8 patients and contributing to the near-death experiences of several others. Angelo's trial was highly publicized, and his actions shocked the nation. During the trial, Angelo's defense argued that he suffered from a condition known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy, in which individuals intentionally harm others to gain attention or sympathy. Despite this defense, Angelo was found guilty of murder and tampering charges in 1988. He was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. Now, it's time for today's subscriber pick. Take a look at this picture. What do you see? The world wars of the 20th century gave rise to the evilest doctors to ever exist, who engaged in heinous acts and unethical medical experiments. Totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan manipulated medical professionals to serve extremist ideologies. The chaos of war eroded ethical boundaries, leading some doctors to forsake their oath to do no harm for scientific advancement. Secrecy and a lack of accountability shielded these perpetrators from justice. While wartime medical progress emerged, it often came at a steep ethical cost. The legacy of these evil doctors spurred international efforts to establish ethical guidelines for research and the protection of human rights, underscoring the vital importance of upholding ethical standards even in times of conflict. Share your thoughts on how you feel about certain medical practices and how harmful they are in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. Number 5. Benjamin Jean. Benjamin Green, a licensed vocational nurse in the United States, is a healthcare professional whose actions shocked the medical community and the public alike. Born in 1956, his story is a disturbing example of healthcare-related criminal conduct. Green's career in healthcare began when he became a licensed vocational nurse. He worked at several healthcare facilities in Texas, including the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Kerrville, where his actions would ultimately be scrutinized. In 2000, Jean was accused of injecting patients with lethal drugs, particularly insulin, while working at the VA Medical Center. These injections led to the deaths of multiple elderly veterans under his care. These patients' sudden and unexplained deaths raised alarm bells among hospital staff and administrators. An investigation was launched to determine the cause of these unexpected deaths. In many cases, suspicion quickly turned toward Jean due to the common thread of insulin administration. The veterans who had died did not have diabetes, and there was no medical reason for them to receive insulin. The injections had caused severe hypoglycemia, leading to cardiac arrest and death. The investigation revealed that Jean had a troubling history of disciplinary actions and misconduct during his nursing career. He had been fired from previous positions due to allegations of patient abuse, dishonesty, and other unethical behavior. These red flags had not been adequately addressed, allowing him to continue working as a nurse. In 2001, Benjamin Jean was indicted on multiple charges, including 2 counts of murder, related to the deaths of 2 veterans at the VA Medical Center. The case garnered significant media attention and raised concerns about patient safety and oversight within the healthcare system. During the trial, evidence emerged that painted a chilling picture of Jean's actions. He had manipulated medical records to cover up his injections, attempting to evade suspicion. His motive remained unclear, but it was apparent that he had abused his position of trust to cause harm to vulnerable patients. In 2001, Jean was found guilty of 2 counts of murder and 11 counts of aggravated assault. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, ensuring he would never harm patients again. Number 4. Walter Jackson. Freeman, II. Walter Jackson Freeman II, often hailed as the pioneer of the lobotomy procedure, was an American physician who conducted nearly 3,000 lobotomies during his career. His approach to the procedure was notably swift, earning it the nickname Jiffy Lube Lobotomy due to the efficiency with which he performed it. Although its outcomes were highly debated, this controversial surgical intervention was believed to be key to curing mental illnesses. Freeman's notoriety extended beyond the operating room as he embarked on a nationwide tour in his lobotomobile. During these travels, he introduced his ice pick method, which involved driving a metal pick into the brain through the corners of the eye sockets. What set Freeman apart was his ability to perform as many as 25 lobotomies in a single day. One of the most distressing chapters in Freeman's career occurred in 1943, when he played a significant role in the lobotomy of Rosemary Kennedy, the sister of future President John F. Kennedy. Shockingly, their father arranged this procedure without Rosemary's mother's consent. Working alongside a colleague, Freeman subjected Rosemary to a procedure that essentially scrambled her cognitive functions, rendering her incapable of coherent communication. Her mental capacity was tragically reduced to that of an infant, a condition she would endure for the rest of her life. In an eerie twist, Freeman and his colleague attempted to gauge the extent of Rosemary's impairment by asking her to sing songs and recite poems. However, this experiment proved to be a grim realization that they had pushed the boundaries of the procedure too far, leaving a young woman with a permanently diminished quality of life. Number 3. Shiro Ishii. Unit 731 was established in 1937 as a part of the Imperial Japanese Army's efforts to develop biological weapons. Ishii, a medical doctor, was appointed as its commanding officer. Under his leadership, the unit conducted cruel experiments on thousands of Chinese, Korean, and other prisoners of war. as well as civilians, often referred to as logs, to dehumanize them. These experiments included vivisections, frostbite studies, germ warfare tests, and forced exposure to anthrax and bubonic plague. Ishii's experiments were conducted without consent and with an utter disregard for human life. Many victims suffered excruciating pain and died as a result of these experiments. The secrecy surrounding Unit 731 and its activities was maintained through extreme measures, including the execution of witnesses and the disposal of bodies in mass graves. One of the most infamous incidents associated with Ishii's unit was the biological warfare attacks on Chinese cities during World War II. Unit 731 released infected fleas and other disease vectors, causing widespread outbreaks of diseases like bubonic plague and cholera, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians. As World War II drew close, Ishii and his unit attempted to destroy evidence of their activities by burning documents and killing the remaining prisoners. However, with the war's end and the subsequent Allied occupation of Japan, Ishii and some of his colleagues faced investigations and potential prosecution for their war crimes. In a controversial move, the United States granted immunity to Ishii and other members of Unit 731 in exchange for the data they had collected on biological warfare experiments. This decision was made because the information could be valuable to the U.S. in the context of the Cold War. Consequently, Ishii and his associates avoided facing international justice for their crimes. After the war, Ishii lived a relatively quiet life in Japan, working in the private sector and avoiding public attention. He died of throat cancer on October 9, 1959, without ever facing a formal trial for the atrocities committed under his command. Number 2. Thomas Neal Cream. His criminal activities first came to light in the 1870s when he was arrested for poisoning a patient, but he managed to avoid a murder conviction due to a lack of substantial evidence. After his release, he moved to the United States, where he continued his deadly spree. Cream's most notorious crimes occurred in the late 1880s in Chicago. He targeted prostitutes and other vulnerable women, luring them with promises of medical treatment or abortifacients. Once under his care, Cream would administer lethal doses of strychnine, a highly toxic substance that caused agonizing deaths. Cream's crimes raised suspicions in Chicago, and he became a prime suspect in several poisoning cases. However, his downfall came when he attempted to blackmail prominent individuals who were customers of the prostitutes he had poisoned. This led to his arrest on July 1892. During his trial, Cream vehemently denied his guilt but was ultimately convicted of the murder of 4 women: Ellen Sterling, Mary Ann Faulkner, Matilda Clover, and Alice Marsh. He was sentenced to death by hanging. Interestingly, Cream's case attracted significant attention due to his attempt to shift the blame for his crimes onto others, including alleging that his victims' deaths were caused by a mysterious Dr. Morgan. Despite his efforts, the evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was executed on November 15, 1892. Number 1. George Chapman. Chapman's reign of terror began in the 1890s when he became romantically involved with several women. However, he had a dark side. He was a poisoner. Using his knowledge of chemicals, he poisoned at least 3 of his common-law wives and possibly others. His preferred method of murder was to administer poison, particularly strychnine, to his victims. The case of George Chapman gained notoriety in 1902 when one of his common-law wives, Mary Spink, died under suspicious circumstances. Her death prompted a post-mortem examination, which revealed the presence of strychnine in her system. This discovery led to Chapman's arrest. The subsequent trial revealed that Chapman had a history of marrying women, insuring their lives, and poisoning them to collect the insurance money. He was eventually convicted of the murder of Mary Spink and sentenced to death by hanging. His execution took place on April 7, 1903. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. And